days are getting longer, and while spring has been slow to arrive, it's clear that warmer days are ahead. Soon, we will be experiencing the best the Inland Northwest has to offer. As the days get long and hot, questions remain about how much the economy will cool in the coming months. We know that inflation has slowed, but there's still some debate about whether a bona fide recession is looming. High-profile bank failures have sent shockwaves through the national economy, as have massive layoffs at large tech firms. How much or how little those ripples are being felt in Spokane is still unclear. Fortunately, here in the Inland Northwest, we aren't afraid of a little adversity. We are nothing if not resilient, resourceful, and perseverant. At the Journal of Business, we endeavor to keep you, our readers, informed about what's going on in our community. Our staff is dedicated to providing you with objective information on news and trends, with the goal of helping you be more successful on your chosen path. It's time to go beyond the sound bites. It's time for more depth than 140 characters can provide. It's time for elevating the conversation.
Well, good afternoon and welcome again to Elevating the Conversation. My name is Paul Reed and I'm honored to serve as publisher of the Journal of Business. I'm also honored that every month so many of you choose to join us for these great conversations. You know, we started this series almost 2.5 years ago because you asked us for a venue where we could have some discussions about things that are happening in our community or impacting our business community, and we've had some great speakers over those last couple of years, including people like Stephanie Kern and Frank Velazquez and Shelley O'Quinn, Jim Frank, Steve Scranton, Larry Crowder, Vange Hockheimer, and many, many others. Next month we have Tiffany Claxton Standley, our new CEO of the Spokane Realtors Association, here to discuss housing capacity. But today, we're very pleased to have with us Rustin Hall, principal at ALSC Architecture, for a discussion about the construction project pipeline. You know, here at the Journal, we pay a lot of attention to that topic because it helps us understand where the construction sector is going to be, not today, but a few months or a few years from now, because they work so far ahead. So are designers and engineers busy today, right now? What kind of projects are they working on? What does that portend for the future? This should be a very compelling conversation. But before we get to that, I want to thank Multicare for sponsoring this month's Elevating the Conversation. We simply don't get to do these kinds of things without the great support of so many community members, and Multicare has been fantastic, not only with the Journal of Business, but throughout the community. So we're very thankful that they've joined us. So let's learn a little bit more right now about Multicare. Take a look.
In 1882, Tacoma's first hospital, the Fannie C. Paddock Memorial Hospital, opened its doors for care. It was the realization of a dream Fannie had before she and her husband, Bishop John A. Paddock, left their home in New York to join the new communities of the Pacific Northwest. Though Fannie didn't live to see her dream come to fruition, her husband carried on her work in her memory, opening the hospital, now called Tacoma General Hospital, exactly 1 year after her death, laying the foundation for healthcare in Tacoma for generations to come, and planting the seeds of what would grow into Multicare Health System. Today, Multicare has grown from a Tacoma-centric, hospital-based organization into the largest not-for-profit, community-based, locally governed health system in the state of Washington, with a comprehensive system of care serving patients from around the Pacific Northwest. Over the years, we've evolved to meet the needs of the communities we serve. We offer inpatient care, primary care, virtual care, urgent care, behavioral health, and other specialty services. We partner with a large network of both employed and affiliated physicians, and we administer or support a wide range of community outreach programs in all the regions we serve. Healthcare is changing faster than ever, and Multicare is changing with it. We are a very different organization than we were just a few years ago. Larger, more diverse, embracing the changes and opportunities for growth that come our way as healthcare continues to evolve. But our commitment to our mission, partnering for healing and a healthy future, and our dedication to the health of the many communities we serve remains constant and unwavering. Welcome to Multicare. We're glad you're here.
Well, good afternoon. Welcome to Elevating the Conversation. My name is Lynn Parrish. I'm the editor of the Journal of Business and your host for the next 45 minutes or so. Rustin, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure. Glad to be here, Lynn.
As Paul alluded to, this is Rustin Hall. He's a principal at ALSC Architects, and we're here to talk about construction project pipeline. So Paul mentioned this too. One of the things that we like to watch is how busy the architects and engineers are as a kind of a bellwether or a predictor of how busy the construction industry is going to be in the near future. So could you give us kind of an idea of what activity is like now and what we might be expecting over the next 12, 18 months in your world?
Well, sure. We are busy, and that makes lots of contractors happy. Contractors love busy architects. That means there's something in the pipeline coming for them. And so we've stayed busy. Actually, the pandemic, thankfully for us, had the minimum amount of impact on professional service industries like ours.
Sure.
So we never really saw much of a slowdown. And we've maintained a healthy workload and a healthy pipeline into the future. So we are busy, staying busy. It's well into the next year or two.
Sure.
And as the industry adjusts to the economy, we have to kind of ebb and flow in terms of what we're watching and being prepared for.
Yeah, sounds good. So when you say we, just to be clear, are you talking about your industry or ALSC specifically?
It's really regionally here.
Okay, good.
We stay pretty close with our peers. I really don't call them competitors. We're more like a fraternity here,
Sure.
I think, because we all stay busy, we compete, but it's friendly, and we have to really key off of each other to understand where that workload is going to be. And,
sure.
We've all stayed pretty busy as a region.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Has the industries in which you've been busy changed at all over the last year or so?
Yes, very much so.
Yeah.
We could see once the pandemic hit, that really had an impact on some of our key market sectors, primarily education.
Sure.
All of a sudden, we're relying historically on maybe 30 or 40% of our work from the K through 12 market.
Oh, wow.
And
wow.
We could see, wait a second, we think that maybe it's going to be trouble trying to get bonds passed.
Sure.
With economic, distress in that. And so we had to pivot a little bit and moved more into the private market and also into the municipal market. As soon as you hear that the federal government is issuing money
Sure.
to counties, municipalities, we've done in our 75 years lots of different project types, so we can really move around pretty easily, but we have to be very methodic about it.
Sure.
And very careful. And we've been able to do that. And one of the big areas that we've moved into on the private side is healthcare.
Oh, sure.
We've done
Sure.
some in the past. We didn't really focus on that, but then we brought some folks on board that really had that expertise and that passion, and recognized in this region how critical it is
Sure.
for that level of outreach out into the smaller communities. Our tribal neighbors really need that kind of outreach.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And telehealth only goes so far. We need bodies out where the bodies are. So
Well, that's interesting, because I was curious. It seems like it was 10 to 20 years ago we were seeing massive projects at the medical centers here, and to where they were largely built out. So I was curious to know, where are you seeing that work in healthcare?
it really comes from mostly the smaller communities is what we're seeing. We're clients such as Chaz. We've done a number of clinics, and we're finding they're going farther and farther out. And I've been on the WSU Spokane Advisory Council for a number of years. And the emphasis on that level of healthcare, that level of outreach into those remote areas has really been a big issue. And the nice thing is it's starting to get solved and to see those types of facilities. But again, primarily on the private side. Small clinics, they're 8,000 square feet, 10,000 square feet, but they're where they need to be. And they can reach so many more people that need that kind of care.
Yeah. Are you seeing anything in the rural hospital setting at all, or is it mostly in those clinics?
For us, it's primarily in the clinics. We've got pretty limited experience with hospitals, and we're frankly not seeing that many. But the action right now seems to be in those smaller clinics.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. Because a lot of those clinics, and I don't want to get too far off track here, but it seems like a lot of the emphasis of the large healthcare organizations here has been to emphasize the urgent care setting, which may be one that you're working in.
Yeah, they offer quite a broad range of services. Pretty amazing to listen to the staff that man those more remote facilities and the wide breadth of services and expertise that they need to bring, and they do.
I can imagine.
It's interesting to design to that as well, to make sure that they can do just about anything they need to do in those remote areas.
Sure. Would you mind if we went back to education for a minute? Because if I remember correctly, the K through 12, at least in our market, typically operates on like about a 6-year cycle for bonds. And so there would be some lag there where we would still have some projects off of the last bond that was passed pre-pandemic. So what are you expecting for that market moving? There's been some work up till now, and what are you expecting from that moving forward?
There have. We are currently working on a couple of schools right now in various stages, both of them now in construction. But you're right that there is a cycle to that, and we're tracking a number of bonds for next year. So hoping that the economy will strengthen, that the recession, if we have one, is a mild one, and that people will recognize the value of bonds and levies for our students, and we'll pass those bonds in 2024. Here locally and in all of Eastern Washington, there's lots of them that we're tracking.
Yeah, that's great. And fortunately, we have a fairly good track record in our market, at least, for passing those bonds. Yeah, great. What about post K through 12 education? Are you seeing much activity in that market right now, or?
We are. We typically have one or two higher education projects going on. We work with all the universities here. We're just finishing up the new fine arts school out at the Falls Community College. That'll open for this September. I think over time that may start to slow down just a bit. As you see the demographics and the numbers and the number of kids coming through. We're still kind of benefiting off of the baby boomers and the millennials from that, but it's really going to start to slow down a bit. We're not as concerned about it here. A lot of people are moving here, so that's how we can continue to feed that pipeline. But nationally, it's going to start slowing down in terms of funding and opportunities for new facilities.
Thane McCullough is going to be with us toward the end of the summer to talk about the enrollment challenges that some of the universities are facing, and it's a fascinating subject because it's purely a numbers thing. Fewer kids, so.
And it's new. That's not what it's been historically here in the last
for decades,
30, 40 years. So new challenges.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, while I'm thinking of it, I wanted to mention that we have a question and answer feature where you can put in any questions you have for Rustin or me, but probably Rustin. And please do that at any time. And once we're done with our conversation, we'll get to some of your questions. So. You mentioned municipal work, and I wanted to touch on that as well. Is some of that the influx of funding that we've seen with some of the COVID stimulation packages?
Yeah, lots of federal dollars went to municipalities and the counties. So we're working on several city hall projects right now in different parts of the state here. Some convention center work. Things that have probably been in the pipeline for a long time, just their struggle was they didn't have a funding mechanism. Now they do. So and there's a timeline on that. So that part of our market's actually picked up quite a bit.
Yeah, that's great. And is that similar to healthcare in that it's a lot more in outlying areas as opposed to in Spokane proper? Or?
Real variety. We're seeing a lot of those in central Washington right now, from Yakima on up to Wenatchee.
Okay.
So,
Great. I guess I'd like to ask you about a few trends that we've been tracking in the architecture world in recent months. One of them is trauma-informed design. And I was curious to know if that's something that you're seeing more demand for, or if it's something that has always been on your radar that has a different name to it now, or what would you say about that?
Sure. It's been interesting to see it with that new handle.
Sure.
It makes it all of a sudden a little bit more tangible and easy for folks to understand.
Sure.
Historically, it's been more along the lines of what can we do in a building, in the design of that building, to make people more productive, feel better, produce a better wholeness, wellness sort of package, if you will. Healthcare has been an interesting increase that becomes even more of an issue. But I was just reading the other day that of the adults in the United States, 70% have experienced a pretty traumatic experience in their lives.
Sure.
And of those, 20% can actually develop PTSD from that. And so what we take from that is not only in our healthcare, but really any facility that we're designing.
Any environment, yeah.
Yeah, it breaks down to empathy and understanding.
Sure.
And the empathy is, I don't know you, but I have to assume you may have, some of these issues or PTSD types of conditions that you're dealing with. And I can design a building that either helps kind of relieve that or very unintentionally start to almost agitate it.
Sure.
So when we're designing buildings, one of the key approaches is called biophilia. And that's the science of human beings needing the connection to the outdoors, to natural elements, which says, well, then we need daylight, we need glass, we need to bring the outside in, inside out element into as many of our projects as we can. That leads to natural wayfinding. I know where I am in the building. I don't have to make lots and lots of choices. We try not to do a lot of symmetry because symmetry actually can sort of mess with you a little bit. It's like I have to decide which side of the building I like better, and they're both the same. Or I need to walk one way or the other around this central thing. That means I have to make a decision, and it's just weird what can sort of spark those kinds of things.
Sure.
And so we're very mindful of that, the colors, the artwork, the sound, the materiality of the space. And we have several full-time interior designers, and that's what they study. That's what, I make sure it's not going to fall down and it's going to do its function. Our interior designers look at it and say, how's this going to make you feel?
Sure.
And that's a skill set that they bring, and they study that theory, and we bring them in right at the very beginning of our projects, because that's very, very important. At the end of the day, if there's something that's going to make you uncomfortable, let's think about that now and make sure we don't do that, as we design the facilities. So
sure.
It's a fascinating subject.
Absolutely fascinating, and it's fascinating that it's something that you hear about in healthcare, at least initially, but that it's really filtering into all kinds of construction projects.
Well, and it has an impact on our students in our schools. It has an impact on anyone that's working in an office building. And that's about productivity and just overall health and minimizing stress and being productive enough that you don't have to work that full 40 hours. You're working smarter because you're healthier and you're getting your work done and more time with your family. So all those things line up. But it's amazing how easy it would be to not recognize those things. And all of a sudden feel very heavy, very dark, very contained, and all of a sudden, you got some problems.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
I also wanted to ask you about challenges, and maybe it's not fair to talk about energy code in terms of challenges. Maybe it's more or as much opportunity as it is challenge, but I did want to ask you, we are seeing more changes in building code as related to environmental considerations, and I was just curious, is that affecting how you design, and if so, how?
Well, it absolutely is. The state of Washington is one of the most progressive in the nation in terms of pushing that agenda of clean buildings and net zero buildings. And although our upcoming code change that we were all gearing for July just got kicked back to the end of November because there's still some issues with that. That's how hard they're pushing. It's huge opportunity for innovation. It's almost an impossible scenario when you first look at it. It's like, how are we going to take something that's highly efficient and make it so much more efficient.
Sure.
And by the way, we can't use any fossil fuels anymore. How does that impact the infrastructure?
Mm-hmm.
And how do we protect the infrastructure from the potential for vandalism and some of the issues you've seen in the paper?
Sure.
So there's lots to consider in that, but no, it's fantastic. That's the direction we need to go, and I'm pretty proud that Washington is leading the charge in that. It makes our job harder, there's no doubt.
I bet.
And our consultants, especially, they're pulling their hair out at times.
Yeah.
You know what, you persevere, and you come up with that next greatest idea that allows you to not only satisfy those new code requirements, but you're creating a cleaner environment.
Sure.
Construction has a huge impact on CO2 emissions. I was just reading a story that said China develops the most CO2. United States is number 2. If the production of cement was a country, it would be number 3.
Oh, wow.
That's the magnitude of what we're talking about.
Sure, sure.
And so, yeah, these guys are coming up with a way of actually growing concrete blocks biologically and not making them, and they absorb CO2. So it's fascinating to see the innovation coming from the challenges that we're facing.
Interesting, interesting. Are there any examples of ways that you have to change what you do in consideration of those building codes as they come online?
It comes down to technology largely. We never used energy modeling software at the very beginning of a project even 10 years ago.
Sure.
Now it's such an important aspect of the decision-making process. Design is just literally making just hundreds of decisions as you continue along.
Of course.
And you can get well down the path and be completely off if you're not really watching what you need to be watching. And in Washington these days, you better be watching what the high performance level is of that design. And we have software where we can test even conceptual ideas, these big ideas, and immediately say, oh, that's a cool idea, but that does not have a chance of performing at the level that the code is going to require it to. Let's set that one aside. This one's working, let's tweak that one. And it's fascinating. And I'm just really glad our younger generation just eats that stuff up.
Sure.
We work together with them, they're brilliant, and we come up with some great ideas that are highly informed. Where before, we would have to test them later and see if we got lucky.
Sure.
So, a little bit different scenario these days.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So what would you say are some of the biggest challenges that your industry is facing right now?
Well, it's been an interesting ride. You know, riding a Bronco, that 8-second ride has been about 3 years now. And it wears you down after a while.
Sure.
Thankfully, things are getting more predictable. Our biggest challenges have been trying to understand materials and labor and the impacts of supply chain issues on delivery and schedule.
Sure.
It's been very difficult to predict. Still is, it's getting better. The good news is the biggest issue still of those 3 is labor. And I'm hoping our workforce development programs here locally will continue to inform students that, being a tradesperson is a fine, living wage job.
Yeah,
and we need those people. And so anyone that helps guide youngsters, please keep that in mind. Someone needs to build America, and they're fine jobs. But that's our biggest challenge. We saw a 20% cost increase in 2020, 15% in 2021. It's finally going to be about 5% this year, it looks like.
Okay.
Historically, it's typically 3.5. So it's getting back to more of a predictable norm, but the labor shortages are still making scheduling a challenge.
Sure. And when you talk about labor shortages, are you talking specifically about in the construction trades, or are you also talking about in A&E where you're having trouble finding people to do what you do?
Primarily the construction industry.
Okay.
There's 500,000 unfilled jobs out there right now in our country in construction. A&E, it's been tough. It's hard to find the people. We're picky. It's more like adoption for us than hiring. But we've managed.
Sure.
We find those people. And we still have a good number of graduates coming out, and they're fantastic to work with. So, but labor side, still a big challenge.
Yeah.
And not necessarily getting better. For all the boomers that are in those trades coming out in the coming years. They're coming out faster than they're going in.
Yeah. Well, and we talked about fewer kids going to college, fewer kids going into the trades, so there's just fewer people entering the workforce at this stage in our generations. Yeah.
And the challenge with that is basic supply and demand.
Yeah.
They can demand a lot.
Yeah.
When there's so few of them. My son's a journeyman electrician in Seattle, and he's like, "Wow, this is amazing."
Yeah.
For what he can do. Young guy, and there's all the work in the world. He will never not have something to work on and be paid well for. So it's a great opportunity. We just need to get kids into those apprenticeship programs. It's still too difficult for them to get in. Too many hoops. We need to just knock down the roadblocks and get those kids in.
Yeah, we've written about that pipeline challenge a couple of times. Yeah, for sure. Well, we'll get to questions here in just a minute, but I just want to make a comment real quick. I think it's fascinating that in talking about architecture, we've touched on so many other fields and the relevance that they have on what you do, and vice versa, the relevance that you have on how they function. So, Paul, do we have any questions yet?
Yes, we do. I have a couple. First one's from Brian Newberry. Hi, Brian. Thank you. He says, "Thank you, Rustin, for your work with kids and Boy Scouts especially. Is there opportunity for kids in architecture, or is it something that's somewhat stagnant or too small?"
Oh, no, there's a definite need for that, Brian. Great question. At our office, we bring in usually 2 interns every summer in various stages of their education careers, so to speak, even as young as second, third year students. And we find it fascinating. We put them to work. We pay them. They get benefits. They meet with our clients. They present their ideas. And it really is a great way for them to understand, is this for me? Because not necessarily everybody makes that right decision. And many times those interns have come back as full-time employees. So that we absolutely encourage that. And kids just need to keep pushing and asking, and you'll find the firms that are willing to do that. And no, there's a huge need for architects, engineers out there. That's going to last for a long time.
And a question from Dennis Gerritsen, and this is a little bit more on the land use issues, but it's a good question. As a Spokane immigrant from San Diego in 2007, I instantly admired how Spokane seemed to be constraining urban sprawl, but I'm not sure that has maintained so, partially in response to us immigrants. Do you see a push, governmentally or otherwise, to build within the limits of existing infrastructure, or is it Wild West land grab without regard for supporting services? We have a lot of land, doesn't mean we have to fill it.
Yeah, there's a lot of emphasis on the urban growth boundaries that we are working inside of. The infrastructure is an issue. It's aging. This is not just a Spokane issue. This is nationwide. We're going to have more and more issues, and that again is going to spur even more development, design, and construction to replace those aging systems. But Spokane does a really good job, and they're focused right now in a big way on trying to focus housing in a lot of these downtown zones and creating opportunities and incentives for those kinds of developments. So, and we work with a lot of municipalities all over. We've worked in 35 states and a couple of foreign projects. We focus mostly in this region. We find Spokane's really doing a great job in not having that sprawl happen. They're watching that very, very carefully.
That's all from outside, but I have a question for you, Rustin. I'll go ahead and ask. So as we grapple with remote work, downtown office buildings are suffering in terms of vacancy because more folks are working from home. What are the opportunities and challenges from a design standpoint of repurposing office space into other uses, perhaps residential spaces? I mean, we got some great Class A space downtown. Is it easier said than done to transform that into something more useful if folks continue to work from home?
You know, we do have a few good examples of where that exact thing has happened, where one use has become something completely different. The M downtown is a really fine example, an old shopping retail block that's now housing. Big project. It's not one that we did, but it's one that we admire. Very challenging in the geometry of the building needs to match the use. And housing has a pretty specific geometry, meaning you can't have a really deep unit. There's a limit on how deep that unit can be inside of the footprint of the building. What they did in the M, which was a great big square with a bunch of dead space in the center, is found really creative ways of using that for amenities for the residents there. And done well, that works really well, but it's a big job. You can imagine just the plumbing load alone going from just open speculative office space to a housing project. But we're definitely seeing that. Malls especially are really getting repurposed. They're becoming, in some cases, lifestyle centers, where rather than the big retail that also is really struggling, it's becoming a different type of use, taking advantage of existing assets, infrastructure, parking, and the ability for lots of different uses to be under one roof, and the efficiency of that. So yeah, it's happening, but it's a job. It's a lot of work.
Well, Rustin, thanks so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Fascinating conversation on an important topic for all of us.
So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yeah, of course, of course. Please join us next month when we have Tiffany Claxton Stanley from the Spokane Association of Realtors joining us, talking about housing, and we're looking forward to talking to her. Until then, enjoy the weather, and we'll see you soon.